Hi, everybody, and welcome to Big Joe's Journal. Well, here we are getting in toward the middle of April. The Easter season now is behind us, and we're moving ahead looking for a beautiful month of May. We certainly cannot complain about the weather we've had so far. We've had touches of early spring, came in late March. We've had a fairly warm April. The big drawback, of course, is the lack of rain. You know, you really don't think much about that in Vermont. We've got all the snow in the winter, and every time we say, well, this snow is going to melt. We're going to have our mud season. Things are going to be all hunky-dory. But here we are in April, and we didn't quite get the volume of snow this winter that we usually do. And the snow has melted off a little bit faster than usually expected. Our streams were usually very high this year. Our brooks and rivers, they aren't quite as high as they normally would be. And they're saying we're into a drought this early. Usually you don't figure a drought in the spring. You talk drought in Vermont, you're talking August, early September. But we do need rain, and the forecast says, well, we're going to get a little bit of rain at the end of the week, but not enough to break the drought. What we need is maybe a day or two of good drenching rain to really soak right in the ground and get over this period of drought. We've had, seeing the news, 4 what we would call major fires around Vermont. One was in Shrewsbury, down in Cuttingsville, where one of the old historic homes down there was demolished by fire. As far as we know, no lives were lost, so that's the plus side. We still don't have the drought situation that they have, say, out in California and in the Southwest, but it's a problem serious enough in this state that state officials are asking us to be extremely careful. We've had major fire up around Bradford, forest fire. With things being so dry, it doesn't take much, you know, to trigger off a fire this time of year. You got a lot of dry timber out there, a lot of dry leaves and grass. You get some high winds. Somebody gets very careless, like saying throw a cigarette out a car window or anything dumb like that. Maybe having an outdoor fireplace and not making sure that the flames were totally extinguished. This can lead to a tragedy in this rather dry season. So the word is be very, very careful. They have Green Up Day coming very shortly when we're going to beautify the roadsides in the state. And other than that, things are looking up. Now, if you're a Red Sox fan, things have to be looking very good. As you know, they started the season off in a disaster, and everyone said, oh no, here we go again. Home did home against Baltimore, got swept. In fact, one game they got blown out by a team that was supposed to be rebuilding. Well, the Red Sox turned it around when Tampa Bay, the defending American League champs, came in, swept them three straight, and returned the favor this weekend by sweeping Baltimore 3 straight games. So, if you're a Red Sox fan, things are looking up. So, you know, there's always a downside and there's a plus side. But it's a good sign. You know, Major League Baseball is underway. An even better sign is that people are able to get outside, and get out in the fresh air and exercise and take advantage of Mother Nature a little bit more. And I think after being quarantined for so long thanks to COVID-19 and after last summer, when virtually everything was shut down, things are starting to open up a little more. And people are realizing the advantages of living in an area like this where you can get out and enjoy Mother Nature, see what's going on. The word from Forest Parks and Recreation is that if you're going to go hiking, they'd like you to limit it because they say, mud season, and a lot of your trails there are very, very muddy. But the situation now, it won't take long for them to dry out. But there are certain advantages. Get out in the open air, wear a mask, keep distancing. This week, people 30 and up can apply to get their flu shots. One of the drawbacks on the vaccine distribution thing, of course, is Johnson & Johnson running into a problem with their supply house in Baltimore, where a few thousand doses of the vaccine had to be thrown out because they were spoiled because of human error. But we seem to be getting there. There's still people that are not wearing their masks, and COVID-19 is still with us. It's still a major challenge. The epicenter right now seems to have shifted to the state of Michigan. And the governor of Michigan has asked if the federal government will add more to their supplies of vaccine to try and get it under control in Michigan. And of course, part of the problem in Michigan is that there's a large contingent of Trump crackpots out there who don't believe in wearing face masks or anything else, and congregating, coming together, without any distancing of any kind. And the result is, boom, COVID-19 has taken off again. And it's on the rise in New York City. There are other strains coming in. There's what they call the South African strain. There's another one they call the Brazilian strain, because Brazil has been hit very hard by COVID-19. Italy, which was once the world epicenter of this disease, it started to boom again down there, or over there. And it's going to be with us for a while, folks. And I know that the current administration, the Biden-Harris administration, are doing their best to get this under control, to get the country back on its feet. But as usual, you've got the naysayers. Unfortunately, they're mainly from the GOP. Mitch McConnell, now the minority leader in the Senate, is doing his best to make it extremely hard for the Biden administration to get their program through, which will try to get this COVID-19 under control. It's going to take a while to do that, but also to crank up the economy again and get it going. Because the way things have been going, with people out of work, people losing their jobs, we were headed for a huge economic depression. But thanks to some advanced progressive thinking by the Biden administration, programs are there which are going to put the country back to work, going to avoid this huge economic depression that would have happened had Trump stayed in office, because he was an idiot to begin with. And unfortunately, a number of Republicans in Congress, they put loyalty to Donald Trump ahead of what's best for the country. And they're fighting these proposals lock, stock, and barrel. But there are ways of maneuvering around it, and Joe Biden spent enough years in Congress, so he has to know how to dodge this and dodge that. And with a very, very, we call it a razor-thin majority in the House, And in the Senate, of course, just one vote, and that's the deciding vote by Kamala Harris. We'll get this program through and get the country back on its feet again. There are a number of Republicans that are very, very concerned. I know the senator from Nebraska is thinking of switching parties, Lisa McCullough. She questioned her mates. She said, what are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? He's no longer president. And that's a question I think we have to ask. Everybody should ask our Republican senators and Republican congressmen. What are you afraid of? Trump's probably going to go to jail. I know he's got a lot of crackpots that follow him, but it's just like any kind of a snake. You cut off its head, it's going to wiggle a little bit, but eventually it'll die. And I think once things catch up with Trump, I mean, the money he owes, which will probably remove much of his fortune, the fact that he has cheated on his income tax, you know, any middle income person that did that would probably wind up in jail for 6 months. And also there are other questions. Question of treason. Did he instigate the insurrection that took place on January 6, 2021? When, knowing that he was going to be put out, he made one last desperate attempt. He invited his goons to come to Washington. And then, of course, with his crackpot attorney, Rudy Giuliani, encouraged them to attack the Capitol, which they did a lot of damage, tried to actually overturn the constitutional certification of the 2020 presidential election, which they failed to do. Congress found the backbone to stand up to Trump's attempt to overthrow the legal process, and Joe Biden's election was certified. Unfortunately, there are a number of Republicans still afraid of Mr. Trump that tried to overturn the process, including three senators. One, of course, was Crazy Cruz from Texas, and I don't know what to call the jerk from Missouri there, Senator Hawley. And the ex and many times fired football coach, now the senator from Alabama, Tommy Tuberville. Sounds like a winner, doesn't he? But the fact, when this is more thoroughly investigated, I do believe Mr. Trump will probably be charged with instigating an insurrection against the federal government. Should be charged with treason, so should Rudy Giuliani. If you'll recall, just before his goons marched on the Capitol, Trump had a little pep rally outside the White House and told him to go up there and take back your government, and so forth and so on. And he said, I'll be marching right with you. Well, of course, you know, that was a big lie. Trump doesn't have the guts to get any kind of a conflict. He never did. He heads back into the security of the White House so he doesn't get hurt. Let these other stupid jerks go up there and maybe get pepper sprayed or whatever, or even killed. Some of his loyalists, of course, as you know, had a scaffold and a noose. They were going to capture the vice president, Mike Pence, and hang him. And Mike Pence, for 4 years, has been one of Trump's big bootlickers. He gave Trump credit for doing things that Trump had no idea he had done. On the plus side, Trump didn't do a heck of a lot. The only thing Trump did on the plus side in all 4 years, got so many people out to vote that wanted to get rid of him. And he never could accept the fact that he was rejected. He asserted loyalty, but to him, it wasn't loyalty to the country, it was loyalty to him and not the nation. And if you will recall back January 6th, and you see some of the videotape of it now, people weren't saying fight for democracy, fight for America, they were saying fight for Trump. And they're waving Trump flags, saying fight for Trump, fight for Trump. Well, he wanted to be a dictator, but as Joe Biden says, democracy struggled, democracy bent, but it did not break. And thank God it didn't. But Trump and his goons are still around, still causing trouble. Every once in a while, the Rutland Herald, you see a letter from Trump's supporter, two in particular, one from Castleton, one from Senator Rutland. You say, what kind of a world are these people living in? Fortunately, Mike Pence, at the end, you can forgive a man his failures when he comes through and the chips are down, and he did on January 6th. He did his constitutional duty. He presided over the certification of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as the winners of the 2020 presidential election. And you got to give the man credit. I mean, he must have been, I would say, shocked. Here he more or less sold his own honor down the river to support Donald Trump. Did Trump say thank you? Of course not. He's going to allow his vice president to be hanged. The goons had gotten their hands on him. Unfortunately, they didn't. And while Trump left Washington before the inauguration of successor, Vice President Pence stayed on and did what should be done, the peaceful transfer of power. So we move on. Challenges ahead of us. There are a lot of changes that have taken place for the better. Joe Biden has a cabinet which is probably the most diverse in U.S. history. It has more women in it than at any other time, and from different backgrounds. For the first time, the Department of Interior, which regulates Native American affairs, has a Native American as the Secretary of the Interior, former Congresswoman from the state of Arizona. And this government is going to function in many, many ways. If you study history or a history fan, whatever, the Biden administration in many, many ways mirrors the administration of Franklin Delano Roosevelt back in the 30s. A number of programs, a number of initiatives have to be taken place to get the country back on its feet. And that's what Joe Biden is attempting to do, and which he will do. He may only serve one term, but I believe his vice president will succeed him, and she will continue that work. You know, she is one tough lady, and she'll be able to handle the job. That's why he picked her. That's why he picked her. And by choosing her, of course, that clinched the election for him. Trump was done when Joe Biden selected Kamala Harris as his running mate. Well, as we move on here in the month of April, hope springs eternal. Across the pond in our so-called mother country, the consort to the Queen, Prince Philip, he was required by protocol on all public occasions to stay at least 2 steps behind his wife, Queen Elizabeth II. And Philip's going to have a state funeral, I believe a toned-down state funeral, at the end of this week. Prince Philip's family name was Mountbatten. And he was from the Greek royal family, although he was educated in England. The Greek royal family, of course, was overthrown and went into exile. But Philip, as a prince, living in England, pretty much, he sort of became a official escort of the young Princess Elizabeth at that time. And of course, it was just a matter of time before, right after World War II, when Philip and Elizabeth were married, of course, with the death of her father, George VI, Elizabeth became queen at the age of 25, and Philip became the consort. We have something like that going on right now in the United States. The office of vice president, for the first time in our history, our vice president is female, Kamala Harris. And her husband is now known as the second gentleman. It's the first time in our history that we've had the position of second gentleman filled. Of course, the first gentleman is the president himself. Well, of course, when Kamala Harris becomes president, her husband will go from being the second gentleman to the first gentleman. So it was rather interesting. And in many ways, if you look at it, it sort of mirrors the Elizabeth-Philip relationship, where he was never the king. She was the queen. And even though he was the husband of the queen, he was never the king. He was always the consort, the prince consort. And in status and rank, or whatever you want to call it, he was outranked by his sons, who were technically legal successors to the throne, and now by his grandson, Prince William, and his son. Well, let's go back to Philip. Philip's son and William's father, Prince Charles. The poor guy wonders if he'll ever get to be king. His mother doesn't want to hang on. She's hanging on to life, and she's not going to abdicate, obviously. Or at least she hasn't up to now. Now that she's a widow, you never know. Philip was 99 years of age, and fairly active for a man of his age. Of course, my own personal opinion, you have all this thing about Harry and his wife, who I think is a troublemaker from the word go. Now she's pregnant again. She's going to have her second child. First one was Archie, and I don't know if Archie's going to have the title of prince or not. But Prince Harry is indicated after following his wife, who, I think she's, as I said, I think she's a troublemaker. I mean, she divorced from her first husband, and she goes over there, and all of a sudden she shakes up the royal family because she's being picked on and everything else. Takes her husband there, Prince Harry, poor stupid Harry, hauls him off to Canada, and now down to California. Well, his father dies. Harry figures, well, maybe I should go home and pay my respects to my dad. And now that's what he's going to do. But I'll bet they had a little family squabble over that. And she says, well, you're leaving me when I'm pregnant. Yeah. Harry had a brain in his head. He'd leave her for good. But the royal family is never known for its intelligence. The IQ level in the royal family Well, actually, it wouldn't be any danger of starting a forest fire, let's put it that way. What did Philip do? Well, supposedly he lent support to a number of charities. I know he used to like to drive a carriage with sometimes 2 horses and sometimes 4. You know, you look around and say, here are all these royals, they're all getting paid, and what are they doing? What do they do for work? What do they do for work? They pose for pictures most of the time. When the tourists go there, especially American tourists with big bucks, and go to England and drop their dough over there. But as far as getting out and doing anything positive for the country, I know the males have to spend time serving in the military, but they're not sleeping in barracks that are cold or anything like that. They're well taken care of. And they're all giving officers commissions. You don't see them starting off as a buck private. They all start in as commissioned officers. And, well, none of them would make Einstein roll over in his grave. I'll tell you that right now. And I think, you know, in my opinion, it's freeloading off the public. Elizabeth as queen, she's a figurehead. The actual head honcho of government in the British Empire, or at least in England, is the Prime Minister, who's selected by whatever party controls Parliament. And they choose the Prime Minister, and he picks his cabinet. The Queen delivers speeches, but her speeches are written for her. All she has to do is put her glasses on and read them. She doesn't have to put any thought into it. But the old tradition, when Parliament opens, the Queen has a speech written for her, and the same thing if Charles becomes king, somebody will write his speeches. He just has to read them. He doesn't have to think about putting them together. So, so be it. Prince Philip dying. How much longer is Queen Elizabeth? She's the longest reigning sovereign right now in British history, I believe. I think she's ruled longer than Queen Victoria, who held that record before her. And whether she will continue on or whether she'll step down and turn it over to Prince Charlie, who's been waiting on the sidelines for a long, long time, or whether she'll say, well, Charlie, you're too old, or Parliament will step in and say, well, let's move on another generation and give it to a younger guy like William. And poor old Charlie, you know, he'll be left out in the cold again. But that's their problem across the pond. Over here, we've got our own. Schools are starting to reopen here, there, and around the country. Here in Vermont, teachers are going back in the classroom. In some cases, Mount Abraham Union High School, which is up in Bristol, they're only going to bring half of their students back because there's not enough room to meet with the requirements of distancing. The building, the school, is not big enough to accommodate all the students available if they brought them all back at once. So they're going to do it kind of like in split shifts, I guess, do it that way. Burlington, of course, their high school is closed. They've converted the old Macy's department store on Church Street in Burlington into Burlington High School. And they're doing split shifts. You know, some kids are in 2 days a week, other kids are in the other 2 days a week. And our education system, because of COVID-19, is fairly chaotic. And this year, well, you got to write it off mainly as a lost year. And that's too bad, because it's going to back these kids up a year in their life. But that's the way it goes. And disease is more powerful than man. We don't wish it, we don't will it, but it does happen. With that, may Almighty God, in His infinite wisdom, continue to bless these United States of America. God love you. Have a great week. Stay healthy. Enjoy the spring. We'll see you all next week.